Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about why doesn't Elon Musk just help the poor instead of worrying about free expression. So before I get into that, I wanted to mention tomorrow, Changizi versus the Department of Health and Human Services. This is a case being brought by Michael Sanger, Daniel Kotzen, and myself through the New Civil Liberties Alliance with Janine Eunice on point as our attorney. And she's also a member of Team Reality. We'll be appearing in federal court in Columbus, Ohio, arguing that the federal government has been violating all of our First Amendment rights because it's been implicitly and almost explicitly coercing Twitter and social media generally to engage in censorship of misinformation. Now, this is a clear violation of the First Amendment. They have been saying since April or May of last year, and continuing to say so even this week, that we're working with big tech, flagging problematic posts, working to ensure that they censor, working to ensure that anybody suspended from one is suspended from all of the big techs, and unabashedly saying that this ought to be the case. And so exactly when they did that, many people in Team Reality were disproportionately permanently suspended, and in many cases like my own, you can actually see as rising and rising and rising in impressions, and as soon as they did that, I started slowly falling as they sort of turned up their algorithms to slowly deboost me more and more. Now, as Elon Musk was entertaining and has now bought Twitter, there was a whole industry of folks saying, hey, why are you wasting $43 billion on free expression when you could spend that money on helping, let's say, poverty, or helping, B, C, or D, lots of other things that need help in the world. And what is an amazing thing to say, because it really shows the degree to which folks misunderstand not only free expression and all of the complex angles and dimensions, as we've talked about here in dozens of Science Moment videos, but it also undermines or illustrates their lack of appreciation for the importance of all of these mechanisms and what free expression does for us. Free expression is the bedrock of freedom itself. Without free expression, we just simply don't have freedom. It is what allows us to maintain all of the other freedoms, is our ability to speak back, to talk back against the government narrative or against the dominant cultural narrative. That's what allows us to do that. If you're not allowed to do that, there's no sense in which you're free at all. And this isn't just academic in the sense of, oh, well, people should be allowed to be free or something like this. No. Freedom, free expression, both of these things on the opposite sides of the same coin, are what undergird our ability to move towards greater technology, move towards the truth, which is new technologies, new forms of wealth, new forms of all the things that we take for granted around us, these amazing technologies around us that increase our productivity. These things rely on technologies, which in turn rely on truth, and vice versa. They're all parts of moving towards prosperity, which is moving towards greater truths, which allow us to untap greater resources in the universe around us and allow us to have more energy per person, per capita, than we've ever had before. So this isn't just academic in the sense of, oh, is it so important? No, it's freedom, and free expression is one that underlies the explosion of wealth that we've seen throughout the world over the last 100 or 200 years. And it's even more important than that, or another angle in which it's important, is that how do you think it is the case that much of the world today treats women as equals compared to 100 years ago, treats African Americans and any minorities much better than they ever used to, homosexuals in other communities, treats them better and better over time. This happens not by virtue of centralized control. This happens by virtue of learning how to be tolerant by hearing the voices of all of those around you and realizing, oh, I thought those voices, they just sounded like strange people in some far away, because I wasn't part of I didn't hear their free expression. The kinds of stuff that they said were treated as weird and out-group and unclean stuff. But now that I'm exposed to it, I can better understand their point of view and realize that it's just some cultural difference and it's not a deep thing. And so a lot of the development over time is not just of greater resources and greater free market and free expression and free market of ideas. It also allows us to grow and allows us to be more tolerant, all of us, more than our parents' generation, more than the grandparents' generation, more than our great-grandparents' generation. If you just go back just sometimes 2 generations, the most liberal, forward-minded folks seem racist or sexist or homophobic by today's standards. Those are at least 3, I think I've gone through, ways in which free expression is crucial at various angles. But it's also disproportionately important for those who are weak. You can appear in the public square, and a public square that's done fairly, like Twitter ought to be, you can be very poor, very weak, have a very bad job, being just very blue collar or no job at all, and have a tremendous voice in the public square, because you can earn it over time by nevertheless saying smart, correct things and building a huge audience. And there's a tremendous number of folks on Twitter who are in fact nobodies in this sense. They don't have some big fancy job with a fancy address. They don't come from rich parents. They may barely be scraping by in real life, but they have a voice. Right? And it's when there is centralized control of the narrative and there's centralized censorship, the first people to lose their voice are the weak. The powerful can still find ways to get their work, their ideas and their viewpoints into the politicians' ears. They can still pay large amounts of money to get their viewpoints pushed into the newspapers. The weak and not powerful can't do that. But in a fair and free and open public square, it favors the weak, because the weak can have a voice, and they can have a voice that's roughly equal. And the first thing that the rich and powerful want to do is to ensure that any threat to them is pushed down. And one of the best ways to do that is to control the narrative. And the only way that you can control yourself, the narrative, and ensure it's controlled, is by centralized fact checker kind of censorship. Right? And it's not just that the weak and the not powerful are shaping their own schemes. No. By virtue of letting the network be free, the network moves towards discovery, moves towards truth, moves towards new kinds of ideas which allow everybody to grow. And they're ultimately constrained by the truth. What's in fact true? What's factual? Those are the boundaries. And you can play with it, you can push it, but still, at the end of the day, the network figures out if someone's built a lot of reputation on lies, eventually they come crashing down. But they can only come crashing down if the forces of open expression and free expression are out there to point that out and to humiliate that person and let them crumble. Over time, the truth prevails only when the network is free and free expression is allowed to reign. And at the end of the day, truth is what helps favor the weak, because the rich can't, at the end of the day, control the truth. So we need to stop undermining the importance in the complexity of free expression and stop imagining that there's this notion of misinformation and the government just needs to come in and figure out which things are true, make sure only those things are said, and that's that. This is a childish kind of understanding of the nature of truth, the nature of science, the nature of free expression, the nature of society itself. And yet much of the populace, disproportionately much of the left today, for some reason, most of the politicians, many intellectuals seem to have exactly that viewpoint. So wish us luck tomorrow in our first appearance with the federal government on trying to push back against their First Amendment violations, and with us and Elon having changed Twitter, maybe we have a sea change afoot. That was your Science Moment.